Primary election month is here, and even more gambling could come to Ohio. Welcome to Columbus on the Record. It seems like we just had an intense election, but here we are again. Voting has begun in the Ohio primary. Voters are selecting their nominees for offices from president all the way down to county prosecutor. The Republican race for U.S. Senate is the biggest race here in Ohio. The winner will take on Sherrod Brown in November in a crucial race nationally. Matt Dolan, Frank LaRose, and Bernie Moreno met for a debate this week on Spectrum Cable, and their stances on immigration was a key point of contention.
The reality is nobody is going to be tougher on illegal immigration than me. I'm the guy who followed the law to come here. You ask any legal immigrant in this country, and when you hear things like, well, you're going to give them visa preferences or et cetera, we have to deport anybody who's in this country illegally, no matter what it takes to make that happen. That's the answer to this.
This is why you can't trust this guy. A few years ago, when he wanted to be popular with his fellow corporate elites, he did talk about, he wrote an article that said there should be a path to citizenship. My team will share it. It's his own words. But now that he wants to try to convince people he's a conservative, he's changed his tune on that.
Bernie doesn't understand, because the dilemma he's had amongst himself is the actual dilemma that Washington's had for 30 years. A few years ago, he wants a path to residency, or talking about citizenship. Now he wants to deport children. That's the exact same argument we've had in Washington for over 30 years. And what happens in between? Nothing. The border does not get secure. That's why I'm saying seal the border. Let's fix it.
Bob Clegg, all three candidates are racing to the MAGA right. Who's winning?
I don't know. I mean, who knows? Obviously, they all are in agreement about the border, but if you would listen to that, you would think maybe there's some difference, but there really isn't any difference. It's all about, well, what did you say 5 years ago? You know, what happened? But it shows you, if nothing else, immigration is a big issue in the Republican primary.
Julie, if you've watched the debate and you see the ads, you can see how they are. That's what's separating them. Is Frank LaRose had said some things about Planned Parenthood years ago, and that's being used against him in an ad. Bernie Moreno, had different positions on guns than he has now. That's being used against him, his immigration stance you just heard.
Right, and on Donald Trump himself, who is a big, elephant in that room. He has endorsed Bernie Moreno, but Moreno was a critic of Trump. Frank LaRose previously had said, I shouldn't endorse in races because I'm the state elections chief. This was in 2020. And this year he is endorsing, and he's endorsed Trump. Matt Dolan, I don't think is trying for the Trump lane, but and has a far less of a record on what he said on national issues because he's been a state senator. But I think that they're each trying to find a way to somehow call the other one out as either not honest or having switched up their positions.
Daryl, is it come down to the Trump endorsement? Joe Biden famously said about Rudy Giuliani, every sentence had a noun, a verb, and 9/11. Bernie Moreno, it's a noun and a verb, and I got the Trump endorsement, right?
Yeah, if there's a risk of pounding the nail all the way through the board, Bernie may be doing that. But sure, I think J.D. Vance is in the U.S. Senate today because of Donald Trump. That key endorsement, I think it's pretty much cause and effect from just a couple of years ago. So he's going to play it for all it's worth. And, he is voicing the rhetoric. And, Frank LaRose is attempting to voice the rhetoric as well. But really, we're going to, how many undocumented immigrants are we up to now? 15 million? All right, whatever. Yeah. Really, we're just, Trump's talking about these concentration camps on the border, detention camps, mobilizing the military. That is not going to happen. This came up in the 2016 presidential race. Even our home state governor, John Kasich, who was kind of the truth teller there, says that will never happen in America. TV pictures of a little child getting dragged off a porch or something, I don't think America will stand for it, despite Bob's correct view that immigration is a huge issue.
Yeah, the immigration, 10.5 million undocumented immigrants in the United States estimated. Morgan Harper, how did Democrats watch this? Are they rooting for one of these guys? I mean, do you have a favorite that you'd like to see run against Sherrod Brown?
I do not root for any of the people that are in the Republican primary, to be clear. I think it is really sad, honestly, that there's not more of a discussion of policy. Immigration is a real issue. We need to talk about it. We need plans. We need solutions. That's not where they're at. And I agree with a lot of folks on the panel. I mean, the Trump endorsement, we need no greater evidence of how impactful that is than J.D. Vance being able to resurrect his campaign in the last Senate primary. And for Bernie Moreno, even though he might have some weaknesses as a candidate, he's flip-flopped. J.D. Vance flip-flopped on supporting Trump, and he was still able to come back. So I think that's what it will come down to.
The difference between this race and the one a couple years ago is there's far fewer candidates, about half as many candidates as there were in 2020. Or
2022.
Yes, 24. Again, you keep people all straight. They all run together. In 22. So is there a chance the Trump endorsement, because that only took a little bit to get J.D. Vance over the threshold. Yeah. Here, Bernie Moreno's going to have to win some on his own.
Yeah, I mean, but look what happened with J.D. Vance. I mean, he was maybe in third or fourth place. He got that Trump endorsement, and he jumped over everybody. And, including Josh Mandel, who had great name ID statewide. That Trump endorsement is just so impactful in these primaries that I don't know how the other guys do it.
I think that it is true that Josh Mandel had name ID. He did also have some negative name ID that I don't think Frank LaRose carries with him. He's a two-time state office holder. He's a sitting Secretary of State. That's the difference here is the smaller field, and that factor on the number two guy is not as unknown. And, suddenly J.D. Vance was like, well, he's the author of Hillbilly Elegy, kind of a star factor. There was a movie with Glenn Close, and, this was something people could grab onto. Here, you do have a number two person who doesn't have the endorsement, who people know.
How does this shake out? Is it organization? You have to assume Frank LaRose probably has the best statewide organization, you would guess, Darrell, right?
I don't know. I mean, Frank LaRose, between the abortion campaign last fall, between the special election campaign the previous August, I was with him for some of those stops when, they all kind of blended together. Right now I'm campaigning on, issue 2 or whatever. But hey, by the way, I'm Frank LaRose. Remember, I was here now. I'm the true believer. I've been with you all along. And he has, gotten a few key endorsements that are usually pretty important in the GOP race, gun rights groups and Right to Life.
Yeah. All right. It was only a matter of time. First, Ohio legalized casinos and racinos. Then came sports betting, including sports betting on smartphones. The expansion has created and generated billions of dollars. Now the gambling industry wants more. It wants to legalize casino games on phones. It proposes putting legal blackjack, poker, and slot machines on your smartphones. They argue it could generate up to $400 million a year in new tax revenue. Julie Carr-Smythe, Michigan has it. Pennsylvania has blackjack on your phone. So Ohio has to do it, right? Is there any push for that at the State House?
It seems to be the main driver of Ohio gambling policy is what's happening in bordering states.
Is this a trial balloon or is this serious?
I just, I'm not quite sure, but it feels as if these get, sent up and then it sort of softens people's thoughts on it initially, and then eventually we get it as policy. That seems to have been the case in the past with these things where we had adamant opposition to certain forms of gambling at the State House at one time, and then all of a sudden it was, we've got to have it because we've got to have casinos, we've got to have this and that, and so we'll see what happens.
Casinos, you have to drive to the casino to play the slots. Sports betting, you have to wait for the game. There's all kinds of things to bet on, but you got to wait for the game. I've played blackjack on my phone for fun. You can lose a lot of money really fast, Morgan. This is a different level of gambling, easily accessible, right?
I'm pretty troubled by this, and we don't really know. I'm not sure if there are algorithms involved in these things, how addictive that is going to add it, if the app is on your phone, and just the amount of money that we saw people spending on sports gambling in just a year. And I know the justification is always the tax revenue, but it was a little over $100 million in tax revenue. We give $11 billion a year in tax breaks to large corporations. Not quite sure that we're getting as much as we deserve, and we are creating a lot of risk, especially for young people that'll grow up with this being normal.
Does this happen, Bob? Is the gambling influences of the State House, have they grown to a point where lawmakers will give them here with some tax benefits and regulations and things like that?
Well, I agree with Julie in that I think this is a softening up process. I could see something like this being inserted in next session's budget bill. I think the problem is it just will generate so much money that I just feel the state's going to start thinking, how can we not take in $400 million in tax revenue? I think it's just going to be a matter of
By making people pay taxes.
Pardon?
By making people pay taxes.
Well, this is an easier way to get money and not get the people that pay taxes and also vote mad at you. So that's why I think it's an easier route to go to get a lot of tax dollars.
We've had casinos for about 12 years now in Ohio. We've had sports betting for a little more than a year. Has gambling really changed the state, do you think, Daryl, that much? They say problem gambling's up, the tax revenue's there, but what do you think?
I think it's not like you drive down the street and say, oh, look at the impacts of gambling, but there are a lot of problem gamblers. There are a lot of people struggling. You talk to teachers about what the kids are going on in the classroom. And that's the thing. We got a phone. I'm sure it'll be illegal for minors, but that's going to be a well-followed law, right? I was talking to Jay Edwards, who's co-chairing a bicameral study commission on gambling in Ohio. He talks about iGames. So this is sort of a branch of that. iLottery, iCasino. Yeah. $400 million. He was saying other states that have implemented that, $1 billion in tax revenue Ohio could get. You start throwing numbers around that, everybody at the State House has a pet project or pet place. Well, we could really use that billion here or here.
And they are what we like to call deep-pocketed interest at the State House. And, I've done some work around the money that flowed from some of these companies into Mike DeWine's campaign and other campaigns here. And, it comes circuitously, but they have the ear of the governor and other Republicans who are making policy.
Morgan, if some of the money does go to counseling for problem gamblers and to try to, help those who get in trouble, but it is an optional thing. You don't have to gamble. And if there is that money to try to protect folks from problem gambling, is there really that much harm in just taking advantage of that money if it is $1 billion?
Yeah, I think it's always harder to solve a problem once you have it. So I'm not sure that that's a sufficient justification, though, certainly good to have some resources available for people who do develop a problem. But I think the bigger issue is this. There are ways to generate money, just as we've been discussing. We don't have to endanger the health and financial well-being of the citizens of our state to do it. Let's explore those instead of creating these types of risk. And I just think, especially if you have the phone component, though that's not necessarily going to happen, we have no idea. People know that TikTok can be bad for them, that it's not a good use of their time, but good luck trying to stop it once you've started to get on that platform.
Oh, yeah. Turning now to another once illegal vice, marijuana. The state continues the process of implementing the law voters passed in November, which legalizes recreational marijuana in the state. Officials expect the first dispensaries to start selling legal cannabis in late summer, fall. The man in charge of regulating the industry predicts Ohio could have up to 300 legal marijuana dispensaries in the next 2 years. As lawmakers hesitate to change the law passed by voters, it will be up to Superintendent of Cannabis Control Jim Canepa and his boss, Governor DeWine, to fine-tune the rules. Morgan Harper, how much fine-tuning can they really do? This is a law passed by voters. It's pretty lengthy, has a lot of regulations in it.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see where they go. I think the funny thing about this is that the legislature just continues to not really choose to do much, and so has left it to the administrative body to implement this. But I think it's normal to have some kind of clarity and guidance for how to go about implementing a new law, and that makes sense. So we'll see where they go.
Darren, what kind of things are they looking at? Are they looking at banning drive-through marijuana dispensaries, things like that?
I think certainly there's concern about the THC concentration, just how potent is this marijuana we're going to be selling in Ohio. Things of that nature, keeping it away from kids, making sure that, ain't varieties or packaging or whatever. But yeah, right now, Mike DeWine and the Senate is ready to rock and roll on this. And the House says, well, get back to us after the primary and we'll start thinking about it. And now this is a statute, so it's not like locked in stone like the abortion constitutional amendment is. So legislators can play around with it. We talk about rules. They can actually change the law, tinker with the law as well. And I don't know. Hopefully something will happen.
Well, are Republicans, there is a primary in less than 3 weeks. Are they afraid that if they vote on a marijuana law, they'll be accused of voting for legal marijuana, even if it's to change it and make it more regulation?
No, I don't know if it's so much that kind of politics. I think it's more the politics of what's going on between the Senate President, Matt Huffman, the Speaker of the House, Jason Stevens. I think it's more that politics.
So it's inside baseball
stuff.
Stuff.
But once again, the state of Ohio has got this whole world of marijuana, which, I've been a proponent of legalizing for years. The state of Ohio is always kicking and dragging their feet. And, I just hope this time it doesn't take as long as it took to set up the whole medical side. That took forever to get that up and running. So, so far it sounds pretty good, but, I still don't know if they are going to move that quickly.
Yeah, the medical dispensaries would go first because they're already set up. They would be allowed to sell recreational marijuana. Then others would join them. 300 sounds like a big number. Then I find out that Michigan has 700 dispensaries, or at least 700 licenses. These could be everywhere.
Yes, I don't think that 300 is spread across the whole state is that many. How many Starbucks do we have? That's true. But I do think that the fact that the medical establishments are here and they can just add it on probably will ease some of that. But to Morgan's point, the legislature could have done this, and they seem to be just not doing things, and particularly things that the voters are telling them they want. They just seem to be dragged kicking and screaming.
But there are things that governor could do, and his cannabis czar could do. You could ban, we have state minimum pricing for alcohol. Could we have state minimum pricing for marijuana?
Could. You can do a lot with rules. Rules can really set the stage for the way you really want to do it. Now, I do think the legislature will come back into this at some point to change the amount of what the taxes are going to be on it. I see them coming in and raising that. What is it, 10% in the law that was passed? I think that's going to be doubled eventually.
What happens to the proponents who got this law passed in November, Morgan, if the state goes too far? The lawmakers, they can change the law. They can do away with the law if they wanted to, but if the regulations are imposed by the governor are too strict, I assume they'd go to court, right?
Maybe, yeah. I think that we've probably cleared the threshold of going back and getting rid of this law. There's just so much support for legalizing marijuana. The ballot initiative was, an example of that. And so I think as long as there is, forward progress and people see that they're trying to implement it, then folks will probably give them a little bit of leeway there. But yeah, if it goes on too long, it's a very well organized operation, and they have resources to counter and potentially sue if they want to.
Are we still looking at fall for these?
I saw that timetable, and I'm sorry, I'm skeptical. Governor DeWine said this week, somebody asked him about executive orders, and he said his legal team researched it, and they've kind of played out their rope on that one. They can go no further. So he expressed worry that if we dawdle too long or the rules get wacky, one of the arguments in favor of this was driving the black market out. he says we'll build the black market and make it even stronger if we don't, exercise some care here.
Because you can start growing marijuana in your yard now.
Right, you can grow and you can use, but you can't buy. And so really the state has that ability. But as you mentioned about Michigan and other, but Michigan particularly, they have it legally, and that's drivable. Are people driving that in and bypassing the law or not? And so I think that getting it up and running and regulating it in a logical, understandable way for people is probably the best bet.
Okay. After waiting nearly 4 years for the federal government to complete its investigation into the nuclear bailout bribery scandal, state officials can wait no longer. Last week, the state indicted FirstEnergy executives, as well as former Public Utilities Commission Chair Sam Randazzo. This week, the PUCO says it will resume its investigation into what went wrong. As we see where all these investigations lead, the system that led to the crimes remains in place. Darrell Rowland, you've watched this industry and its power at the State House for a long time. The former Speaker of the House is in federal prison, and there really has been no movement to really change how the PUC operates and how utilities are regulated.
I know, and my understanding when the PUCO was first formed, it was to be a little more neutral way. Right now it seems to be totally pro-utilities, even though there's supposed to be, consumers representative on there and all that stuff. And so I don't really see a whole lot of weighing one side versus the other on the value of the various proposals that come before them. So, and the Consumer Council has been stripped of all authority. John Kasich, pretty much defunded that office.
Morgan, go ahead, Julie.
The Consumers Council being at the office that is ratepayer funded to defend ratepayers as their lawyer, and it was sort of a groundbreaking office when Ohio came up with the idea back in the 70s, I think, and then it's been sort of stripped of all of its power.
Yeah, Morgan, what if you could pick one change for how the state regulates utilities? What would it be?
Having people who care to regulate the utilities on the PUCO. This is the interesting thing about utilities, and this is a national conversation that's happening about how we can have better utility policy, because utilities, to Darrell's point, have a lot of power. They are government-created monopolies that then get to also be on the stock market and pay their CEOs, like we see with AEP, $16 million, and do stock buybacks and pay dividends, and they don't necessarily have accountability to the people unless we have strong regulators in those positions. And this was one of the reasons why in some of the grassroots organizing that we do, we went to the streets, because if you don't have good people at the PUCO who are interested in representing consumers' interests and living up to the mission of protecting the public interest, which is the PUCO's mission, then you need to raise attention in a grassroots way to say that consumers can't take any more price hikes.
The argument, Bob, is you need folks who have experience in the utilities, because it's pretty complicated. What about like a revolving door law? You can't serve on the PUCO if you've worked for a utility as a lobbyist or an executive for a year, 2 years, 5 years.
What about if you never have worked for a utility? But of course, that was the reason why Sam Randazzo was picked, because he had that utility background that, everyone felt that someone who's going to be the chairman of the commission should have. Now, we got to decide, do we want somebody with utility experience, or do we want people that are just going to be fair about, the whole process? And I don't think that's been decided.
I don't think it's necessary for people to be utility law experts and sit on the PUCO. Journalists learn about it to a level where we can understand when people are getting ripped off by reading it on a piece of paper. People can have a reasonable amount of intelligence and regulate an industry that they're not embedded with.
How about, we've heard about side deals where big consumers get special rates. Should they just be eliminated?
Yeah, in building off of Julie's point, I completely agree. I think it is this red herring that you have to be some absolute expert in utility policy to be able to make decisions. Here's a decision that has been made by our PUCO to give Amazon breaks on their electricity bills. Do you need to have a PhD in energy policy to just say that that's a bad idea? Ban these deals. It's crazy, and it's taking money away from other things that we need it for.
All right, we'll see what happens with that PUCO investigation. Time now for our off-the-record parting shots. Morgan Harper, you're up first.
So there's a case that we are hearing should be filed on around the Kroger-Albertson merger. So Kroger, based here in Ohio, of course, is trying to acquire a grocery chain based in the western part of the country. And a lot of folks are saying this could raise prices and hurt workers. And so we'll see if the Federal Trade Commission decides to intervene.
Bob.
Micah may be winter, but summer is coming, and we know that because the Ohio State Fair announced the first couple acts that are going to be performing at the State Fair, one of them being Alabama.
Interesting. You're a big Alabama fan, I take it.
No, not really.
Alabama to come to Columbus.
Julie.
Well, we saw early voting start this week. I'm going to be really interested to see the level of interest in this race and how it contrasts or compares with 2023 when hordes of people came to the polls. And it'll be telling then about what will happen with the Senate race.
Daryl?
Intriguing letter came out from the Democrats. We say it's all politics, but they requested federal investigations, almost criminal investigations, of the DeWine administration for all these hanging issues, these unanswered questions that have been coming up that a lot of us have been writing about it and reading about and watching on our TVs. Jump in and sort this out for it, because we can't do it ourselves. Dave Yost was copied on that letter as well.
All right.
So we'll see if anything comes of that.
As you saw from the debate on Spectrum TV, all the Republican candidates for Senate had red ties, like I have, like Bob has. So they're all wearing the Trump uniform. I wonder if they're wearing the new gold sneakers. You couldn't see it. And will they get the hold of them before Trump comes to town in this race? Anyway, that's Columbus on the Record for this week. Check us out online. Watch us anytime at our website and the PBS video app, as well as YouTube. For our crew and our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.